The courtroom held its breath. You could almost feel the weight of judgment in the air. And right there on the stand was 8-year-old Layla Tiny, trembling, her white cane clutched like it was the only thing keeping her upright. She was blind, and the tears trailing down her cheeks said everything. Except the part that really mattered. She wasn't crying out of fear. She was crying because no one believed her. Her voice cracked when she whispered, "He lied," but the room didn't shift. No heads turned, no hearts softened. The judge let out a tired sigh. The defense attorney smirked. And then the courtroom doors creaked open. The sound of paws steady, certain echoed through the silence. Max, her German shepherd. Her protector, her everything. He wasn't supposed to be here. But he walked in like he belonged. Layla's breath hitched. What was he doing? And more importantly, what did he know? Because Layla hadn't lived like most kids. She had never seen the world through her eyes, but she felt it, heard it, sensed it. Every texture, every breath of air, every shift in someone's voice told her stories most people missed. Her world had always been small, safe, controlled, then Max came crashing into it. He was a retired police dog, scarred, quiet, weary in the way only those who've seen too much can be. A volunteer had dropped him off, thinking he might be helpful. Layla wasn't so sure. He was big, mysterious, a little scary. But the first time she reached out and touched his head, he leaned in gently, like he knew her. From that moment, it was done. Max walked her to school. He rested his head in her lap while she read out loud, his ears twitching with every word. He even barked softly when someone came too close, never angry, just watchful. And then came that one day. Layla stood outside school, waiting. Her aunt was late. Max went still. His muscles tensed. A man walked up, his voice too smooth, his steps too quiet. "Hey there, little girl," he said. "Your ride's not coming. I'll take you home." Layla felt the air change. Backed up instinctively. Max stepped in front of her, low and growling. That sound, it wasn't loud, but it rumbled in her chest like thunder. The man hesitated, then turned and walked away. Shaking, Layla wrapped her arms around Max. "You knew," she whispered. "You knew he was wrong." Later that night, she heard her aunt on the phone, worried, afraid. "Some man tried to take her," she said. "There's footage." But Layla's blind, she couldn't see his face. Layla didn't say a word, she just kept her hand in Max's fur. She didn't need to see, she had him. But then came the call that flipped her world upside down. Her aunt arrested, accused of crimes that didn't make sense, fraud, theft. Layla was the only one who knew the truth. And Max, he was the only one who'd felt it too. But no one listens to a blind girl. And no one listens to a dog. After the arrest, Layla was placed with foster guardians. The house wasn't unkind, but it was cold, not in temperature, in trust. And Max? They didn't like him. "He's too big," they said. "He could hurt someone." "He's not just a dog," Layla whispered. One morning, holding him close. "He's all I have." But no one really heard her. She told the police what she remembered, that the man who visited her aunt's house, the one who signed papers and walked too quietly, was the same man Max had warned her about. But the officers just gave her soft smiles and told her she was brave. Then they closed their notebooks. So she stopped talking to people. She only talked to Max. Curled up in bed, she'd press her face into his neck and whisper her fears like secrets. He always listened, always stayed, always knew. Max had always stayed close, always, until one day. He didn't. It was supposed to be a regular walk, calm, quiet, but suddenly Max stopped, his body tensed. A low growl rolled from his chest like distant thunder. Then, without warning, he bolted. Across the street, a man stumbled backward as Max lunged not to attack, but to confront. "Control your dog!" The man shouted, panicked, but Layla didn't move. She couldn't see the man's face, but every part of her knew. That voice, that scent, that shift in the air, it was him. Before she could speak, her foster father yanked her back, furious. "That's enough," he snapped. "This dog is dangerous." "He's leaving tonight." "No," Layla cried, clinging to Max's collar. "He was protecting me. That man, he's the one who tried to take me." But her words hit a wall. No one listened. That evening, Max was taken away. Layla cried herself to sleep, arms empty, heart shattered. The next morning, a letter arrived. She was being called to testify, alone. Days later, she stood in court small. Shoes too big, hands trembling. Her voice barely rose above a whisper. I know who did it, but no one believes me. The judge let out a weary sigh. The lawyer shook his head. And then, from the back of the room, a voice rang out, Your Honor, there's someone who might. The doors creaked open. Soft, steady paw steps tapped across the courtroom floor. Layla turned toward the sound, breath catching in her throat. Max? She whispered, and there he was. He didn't charge. Didn't bark. He simply walked to her, tail low, gaze focused. Max sat by her feet, calm and certain. Then he looked up past the judge, past the jury, toward the second row of seats, and stared. Layla felt it before she even spoke. He's here, she said quietly. The man who tried to take me, Max knows. The bailiff hesitated, Max growled. The man in the second row shifted, chuckled, nervous, then ran. Gasps filled the courtroom. Max leapt over the barrier like it was nothing, chasing him down the aisle. He didn't bite, he didn't hurt, he just stopped him, held him still until officers swarmed in. Moments later, a young officer rushed into the courtroom, holding a file. We got the DNA match, he said, breathless. His fingerprints were all over the forged documents. The courtroom buzzed. Layla stood frozen. He remembered the smell, she whispered. That's how he knew. The judge leaned back, stunned. It appears, he said slowly, that this dog just revealed the truth no one else could. Tears streamed down Layla's face, but this time she smiled. Max had saved her again, but as he returned to her side, she noticed something. Was off? A limp, Max? She whispered, kneeling. Her hand brushed his shoulder, wet, warm, sticky, blood in protecting her. Max had been hurt, badly. Later at the animal hospital, Layla sat by his side. The machines beeped softly. The bandages were thick. He saved me, she whispered to the nurse. Not just in court. Max always knew, even when no one else did. The trial was over, her aunt cleared. The newspapers called Max a hero. The court allowed his testimony, labeling it exceptional, but Layla didn't care about any of that. She just wanted him to be okay. Then the door opened and her aunt walked in, tears in her eyes. She dropped to her knees and wrapped her arms around Layla. I'm so proud of you, she whispered. You were so brave. Layla nodded, but her voice cracked. I wasn't brave, she said. Max was. I couldn't have done anything without him, Layla whispered. Her aunt looked at Max bandaged but alert and smiled through her tears. Then I guess we owe him everything. In the days that followed, Layla came to the animal hospital. Every afternoon. She didn't just sit with Max, she brought him her world. She described the way the breeze moved through the trees outside, the birdsong in the morning, the way the sun felt on her face. She painted pictures with words because that's how she'd always seen things. And Max, he listened, like always. His tail would thump, slow but sure, every time her voice rose with excitement. When he was finally strong enough to leave, Layla was the one who walked him out, one hand gripping her cane, the other curled tightly around his leash. Reporters lined the sidewalk, cameras flashing. But Layla didn't flinch. Someone asked what kind of medal he'd get. She just smiled and said softly, he doesn't need a medal. He just needs a home. And he already has one with me. Max didn't bark, didn't move much. He just leaned into her leg, steady and sure, like he understood every word. The whole world had seen their bond now. But for Layla, it had never been about attention or headlines. It was always about trust, about love, the kind that doesn't need eyes to be seen. And together, they stepped into the sunlight stronger, safer, and forever connected. Years passed. Layla grew into a quiet, confident teenager. Her steps more certain, her spirit more fearless. And Max, he aged too. His fur grayed, his pace slowed, but his loyalty never did. Every morning, they visited the little park near their home. Layla would sit, face tilted to the wind, listening to the world. Max lay beside her, head resting on her foot like always. Sometimes kids would stop and ask, "How did you know he was your dog?" She'd smile and rest a hand gently on his back. "Because he saw me," she'd say, even when no one else did. Layla had once lived in a world full of doubt and silence. But Max had shown her something different. That trust wasn't about seeing. It was about feeling, listening, believing, and as the sun dipped low behind the trees, she leaned down and whispered, "You were my eyes before I even knew I needed them." And Max, ever faithful, gave one soft thump of his tail, quiet, certain, forever.
I thought I'd seen everything living this close to the wild, but when a wounded she-wolf showed up at my gate and brought with her something I still can't explain, I knew nature was about to rewrite everything I believed. What she led me to changed my life forever. When I saw the she-wolf at my gate, my heart stopped because I knew she hadn't come by chance. The wind had died, leaving the world swollen with silence. Snow stacked on the railing like white ash. My old lantern hummed in my glove as I pushed the porch door open. One crunch, two crunches across the boards, then that sound. A ragged shuffle in the yard, too slow for a deer, too soft for a bear. I swung the light, and the beam caught her. Gray pelt, clotted dark with blood along her shoulder and ribs. She stood as if the earth itself had risen to hold her upright. No snarl, no bared teeth, just those eyes, amber and steady, tracing the circle of light until they locked on me. My lungs forgot what to do. A lifetime tracking elk and guarding cabins, and never once had a wolf chosen to stay inside the torch glow of a man. The gate hung half open from the last storm. She could have slipped away in one breath. Instead, she planted a forepaw, trembled, and held. Steam coiled off her muzzle. Snow kept falling, slow and fat, settling on her back like a blanket she didn't bother to shake. I wanted to believe she was confused, that the wound made her dizzy, that instinct had misfired. But I saw the line of her spine braced against pain, the deliberate way she balanced weight off the injured leg, the calm in her stare. She was making a choice, and I was part of it. I eased a step forward, lantern low, voice even. "Easy, girl." The words came out thin. 20 paces separated us, a gulf of history, fear, and frozen dirt. Her ear twitched. That was all. No retreat, no charge, just a flicker of acknowledgement, as if language meant less than the heartbeat I felt banging against my ribs. Blood dripped to the snow, each drop a black coin burning a hole through white. My mind raced through rules learned young. Never corner a predator, never approach the wounded, never let sympathy override sense. Yet the night felt charged, like the woods were holding their breath, waiting for whichever of us moved next. I saw her sides rise, fall, then stutter. Pain kinked her back leg, and she sank to her haunches. Still, she didn't break eye contact. A smudge of frost on her whiskers caught the lantern flare, turned silver. I swallowed. Wolves do not ask for help. They vanish. They endure. They die unseen. But she had stepped out of shadow onto my threshold, as if it were a clinic door. I thought of the rifle inside. I thought of the ragged entry wound glinting beneath her fur. A hunter's shot, a snare, or the jagged claw of another wolf. None of it explained the question in her gaze. A steady, patient, "Why are you waiting?" Instinct tugged. Fetch warm water, gauze, meat. Logic shoved back. She will tear you apart the second pain jolts her. My boots rooted to the snow. Between us, my breath fogged and drifted past her muzzle like smoke mingling with smoke. She shifted. One deliberate motion, she pressed her good paw against the gatepost, straightened, and took a single, wobbling step toward the woods. Then she stopped, turned her head, and looked back at me over her shoulder. The lantern's glow caught a flash of something in her eyes. Was it hope? No, it was expectation. She was inviting me. The porch boards groaned under my weight. I stepped forward, another crunch, my heart skittering. She didn't flinch. She took another slow step, crimson pearls falling behind her. Then another. Each time she paused and checked that I followed, like a guide sure of the trail, but uncertain of her pilgrim. Snow whispered against my coat. The world narrowed to the ragged string of footprints she left, and the hinge-squeak rhythm of her breathing. Far beyond the tree line, a barred owl called, low and distant, as if reminding me whose kingdom I was entering. 5 yards out, she halted again. The distance between us shrank to a space I could cross in 3 strides, yet it felt wider than the canyon west of the ridge. I could smell her now, wet fur, iron, pine pitch. My throat tightened. She was alive, and she was hurting, and she had chosen me out of every creature under these stars to see that. I lifted the lantern a hair higher. Its glow painted her pupils gold. Something passed over her face, a flicker of relief. She gave a faint, rasping huff, neither growl nor whine. Then she turned once more toward the darkness between the birches. That was the moment doubt pierced me like a splinter. Was this mercy or madness? I was a lone man stepping after a wounded predator into winter woods, but the fear in my chest lay tangled with wonder, and the wonder was heavier. I shifted the lantern to my left hand, flexed the fingers of my right inside the mitten, and took the step that would carry me past the gate, past safety, into whatever purpose she stored behind her silent gaze. I thought that was it, that she'd slip back into the dark and leave me staring at empty snow. But nature had planned a very different surprise. I eased the latch and pushed the gate wide. The hinges groaned like something waking from a long, cold dream, but the she-wolf never flinched. She stood fixed in the lantern glow, ribs heaving, one foreleg lifted, blood darkening the snow at her feet. For a breath I wondered if pain had frozen her solid. Then her ears twitched toward the tree line, and she looked back at me as though checking whether I was still real. I took a single pace beyond the gate. My boots sank to the ankle. Fresh powder whispered against the leather. She did not recoil. Instead, she turned her head to the forest again, the way a guide glances down a road she already knows by heart, then limped forward 3 careful steps. Snow scattered from her belly fur. She paused, waited. Those amber eyes found mine, and in them burned a patience so deliberate it sliced through my caution. The message settled in my bones before my mind caught up. Follow me. A gust rattled the porch shingles behind me. I pictured my rifle on its rack, the insulated parka hanging by the stove, the safe, bright window of the house. Reason yelled that I was about to trail a wounded predator into black timber, but something deeper pressed the thought aside, something forged from equal parts wonder and dread. I ducked back inside long enough to grab the heavy coat, a spare flask of lamp oil, and a length of old wool blanket. The rifle stayed on the wall. I could not shoulder it without betraying the fragile thread that had formed between us. When I returned, she was waiting in the same spot, moonlight frosting the blood along her flank. I slipped the coat on, cinched the collar, and lifted the lantern high. She turned, placed her weight on 3 legs, and slipped through the gate's opening into the unbroken white beyond the yard. Snow swallowed our footfalls, hers a dragging crunch, mine a muffled grind. Tall pines leaned inward, caught the starlight like cathedral pillars. I tasted iron in the air, smelled distant cedar pitch. Every dozen strides she paused, swung her head over her shoulder to be sure I stayed within the orbit of her trust. She didn't run from me. She led me, as if she trusted me. The thought struck with such clarity, I spoke it aloud, and the sound of my own voice startled me more than the forest. Blood drops peppered the snow at uneven intervals, bright as coal against drifted white. Each one sparked the same worry. What trap lay ahead? A hidden snare? A second wolf defending territory? Or worse, my imagination fed on old hunter tales, wolves drawing men into ambush. The stories never mentioned a guide who limped and bled and waited for her follower to catch up. Still, she pressed on. The trees thickened, muffling the faint night breeze until only the rhythm of her breathing filled the air. She veered left around a snag, ducked beneath a fallen birch, then paused again beside a granite outcrop rimmed with icicles. There she lifted her muzzle, tasted the air, and for the first time released a sound, a low chuff, barely louder than the flap of an owl's wing. It was not pain. It felt like reassurance. I caught up beside the rock, my thighs burning from the uphill slog. The lantern glow danced on quartz veins. She watched me a heartbeat longer, then pressed on. We crossed a frozen creek. Ice cracked under her weight. I halted, heart lurching, but she moved with the instinct of an animal born to winter, finding the solid ribs beneath the crust. I followed her prints exactly, measuring each step to the scar her paw left in the snow. Somewhere above, the clouds parted, and moonlight spilled over the clearing we entered. The trees pulled back enough for me to see the slope ahead, a long, narrow ravine lined with spruce and black hemlock. She stopped at its mouth, sides quivering, breath pluming white. The ravine swallowed the light. Beyond its first curtain of branches, everything dissolved into ink. My courage faltered. The cabin lay a good mile behind, and already my toes tingled from the cold. Doubt crouched in my head. Turn back. Nobody will blame you for wanting to live. Yet another voice, older and rough-edged, answered, "She chose you. Do not fail her now." She stepped into the ravine's throat and vanished between the trunks. My chest pinched. If I hesitated, the dark would close over her, and I would be left with only footprints and questions. I tightened my grip on the lantern, felt the metal handle bite my palm, and followed. Inside the ravine, the wind died. The snow here was untouched, pristine, except for a single trail, the smear of her passage, a line of disturbed powder and twin drops of fading crimson. The walls rose steep and close, draped in daggered ice that glimmered like glass teeth in the lantern flicker. Shadows clung to every ledge, waiting to swallow sound, to swallow me. She kept a slow, relentless pace, pausing often, always glancing back, as though gauging the limit of my fear. Each time our gazes met, something steadied inside me, the way a compass needle settles on north no matter how violently you shake it. We climbed another 100 paces until the ravine opened into a small shelf of rock beneath an overhang. There she stopped so abruptly that snow cascaded from her shoulders. Her ears pricked forward toward a darkness deeper than the rest. My pulse throbbed in my throat. I lifted the lantern, trying to pierce the black. Nothing moved in that hollow, but the air tasted warmer, faintly animal, as though a living thing breathed somewhere just beyond sight. I thought the journey was finished, that she would curl up here and surrender to exhaustion. But her head swung toward me one last time, urgency flaring in her eyes, and she vanished into the yawning dark beyond the overhang. And I realized with a cold jolt, the true reason she had sought me was still ahead. She had not brought me here to witness her ending. She had brought me here to witness something else entirely, something she alone could show. What? I had no idea. All I knew was the night was far from over, and the forest's secret had only begun to unfold. The ravine pinched narrower, its walls glazing with blue ice that caught the lantern flare and threw it back like trapped lightning. Every breath rasped in my throat. The air here felt older, pressed flat by centuries of snow. The she-wolf forged ahead in a wobbling line, her paw pads slipping on the slick rock, blood prints smearing crimson crescents behind her. Slopes rose on either side. Black spruce angled so sharply they looked ready to spear the sky. Yet the forest held its breath, as though every creature had been warned to keep still. A dead spruce lay toppled across the gully, roots torn free and fanned like a frozen explosion. Beneath its heaved trunk yawned a low, ragged opening, darker than the night, rimmed with frost-furred moss. The wolf limped straight to it, pawed once at the crusted snow, then collapsed onto her belly, ribs shuddering. Her muzzle tipped high, and she released a sound I had never heard from any predator, a tremulous, yearning whine that seemed to ask permission from the darkness itself. Wolf pups, I thought, and my chest knotted. All this way to protect her litter, maybe to beg the strange two-legged creature for help she could no longer give. I edged closer, heart jackhammering. Lantern light skated over clawed earth, tangled roots, a scatter of bones picked clean by time, but no quicksilver shapes darted from the hollow, no high squeaks of hungry mouths. She kept that low call going, soft and rhythmic, until the hairs on my arms bristled with something that felt like prayer. She paused, ears pricked, waited. Silence rolled back. Then, from the pit, came a reply that was not pup nor beast. It was a human groan. I froze, disbelief slamming into me so hard my knees buckled. Again the sound rose, raw, broken, the voice of someone hauling themselves out of a nightmare. Adrenaline punched through doubt. I dropped to my knees, thrust the lantern forward, and scrambled beneath the fallen trunk. There, half buried in cedar needles and snowmelt, lay a man. Skin gray with cold, beard clotted with ice crystals, cheeks sunken to bone. A ragged wolf pelt, fresh, still slick with oil, had been dragged over his shoulders like a blanket. Under that makeshift hide, his chest moved in shallow, stubborn jerks. "Hold on," I blurted, voice cracking. My fingers found his wrist, a thready flutter, but alive. He wore no coat, only torn flannel and canvas pants, stiff as bark, one boot missing, the other split open. Dry blood laced his ankle where something, trap maybe, had chewed. I swept the lantern beam for any sign of how long he'd lain here. Gnawed bones of rabbits, a circle of half-eaten grouse, the unmistakable marks of a she-wolf's care, meat fetched, shared, shelter guarded. She had been nursing him. The thought cannoned through my skull. Wolves don't save men, they fear or kill them. Yet the proof lay breathing beneath my hands, smelling of pine pitch and damp fur, his torso wrapped in strands of dried grass, as if some animal had tried to insulate him. I pulled off my outer coat and stuffed the blanket from my pack around his torso. His eyelids fluttered at the sudden warmth. Lips cracked, he mouthed a word, too faint to catch. I leaned closer. He tried again, breath snagging. "Water." I fumbled my canteen open and trickled a mouthful past his lips. He coughed, swallowed, then sagged like a string-cut puppet. I glanced back toward the opening. The she-wolf still lay motionless, yellow eyes reflecting firefly pinpoints of lantern light. Blood soaked the snow around her flank, but her gaze stayed fixed on us, intent, unwavering, as if she had escorted me to the sacred center of a maze and now waited to see if I understood its riddle. I braced a hand beneath the stranger's shoulders, feeling jutting ribs through soaked fabric. He weighed almost nothing. Starvation had hollowed him into something more spirit than flesh. How many nights had he survived on the warmth of a dying wolf, on scraps she tore from her own hunts while bleeding out? A swell of awe lifted the roof of my skull. Fear, wonder, gratitude tangled until I couldn't separate one from the next. She chose me, I thought again, but now the words rang different. Not to save herself. She'd spent her strength already. She needed a pair of hands, human hands, to lift what her jaws could not. I hooked my arms under the man's and dragged him toward the opening. The she-wolf lurched upright despite pain, inching aside to grant passage. As I slid us free of the hollow, moonlight silvered his face, and my breath hitched hard. I'd planned on a nameless hunter, some unlucky stranger blown off course, but the lantern flame steadied, and the features sharpened under its glow. Recognition struck like a hammer. My vision tunneled, the forest reeled. It wasn't a stranger at all. "My God," I whispered, voice breaking. I couldn't finish. The name lodged in my throat like ice splinters, because if I said it aloud, the world would tilt off its axis and nothing would ever be simple again. I thought fate had tossed me a lost woodsman and counted me fortunate. But the moment I saw his face, really saw it, I nearly blacked out where I knelt in the snow. My lantern shook so hard the flame nearly guttered. Beneath its trembling light, the man's beard, the shape of his cheekbones, the scar above his left brow, all slid into a pattern burned into my memory. "Nathan," I croaked, the name splitting me open. 7 winters had buried that word, yet it rose like it had never been gone. For an instant, the world spun. My knees hit the snow. The cold punched my gut, but it was the shock that made everything tilt. My son, my boy who left for the Sierras and vanished, lay limp in my arms, thin as a shadow, yet breathing. I pressed 2 fingers to his neck again just to be sure. A pulse fluttered, frail but real. My vision blurred. I heard myself saying his name over and over, a broken chant stitched with disbelief. Nathan's eyelids flickered. He tried to focus, but the pupils drifted like compass needles seeking north. He didn't know me yet. Maybe he didn't even know himself. Snow sifted onto his face. I brushed it away and forced my mind to work. I needed heat, shelter, food, now. But each thought crashed against another. How? Why? Where has he been? They tangled, useless, so I clung to the only truth that mattered. He was alive, and I had to keep him that way. A low thud drew my gaze. The she-wolf had settled beside us, chest heaving, muzzle streaked with frost and dried blood. Her ears faced forward, not in warning, but in watchfulness. She didn't flinch when I shifted Nathan into a fireman's carry, didn't snarl when I slid the wool blanket beneath his torso to drag him. She simply adjusted her weight and crawled far enough to give me room, then fell in beside me as I began the slow pull toward the ravine mouth. The slope was steep, my boots skidded, knees screaming. Nathan's limp arm trailed grooves through the snow. I angled the lantern on a nearby ledge, light spilling down so I could see every jagged rock before I snagged on it. The wolf paced my left flank, panting, head low. Moonlight caught the dark smear along her ribs where blood still seeped. She matched my rhythm. Drag, step, brace, drag. Twice she nudged Nathan's dangling foot clear of jutting roots before it snagged. The sight punched fresh awe through my panic. She didn't leave, I muttered, half to steady myself, half because saying it made it real. She stayed, as if she wanted to make sure I'd save him. The words tasted like iron and gratitude. Halfway down, the memory burst in. Nathan at 23, grin peeling wide when he hoisted his pack, said he'd camp for a week, photograph winter stars, maybe find that frozen waterfall nobody could reach. I'd hugged him hard, told him to mind the weather. 4 days later, a blizzard swallowed the ridge. Search teams combed for 2 weeks, found only a torn map and chatter of avalanche rumbles. His mother died believing the mountain kept him. I built this cabin to stay near the last place he'd been seen, because leaving felt like letting him vanish twice. And now here he was, returned by the jaws of the very wilderness that hid him. At the ravine floor I paused, chest burning, and checked his breath. Still shallow, still there. The wolf sank onto her haunches, sides hitching, snow around her soaked dark. She was failing fast, yet her eyes never left Nathan's face. That gaze anchored me harder than any rope. I hauled again. The climb out of the ravine's throat blurred into grunts and sliding snow. Muscles spasmed, but adrenaline kept me upright. Every few yards the wolf rose, limped forward, collapsed, then rose again, pacing our progress. Not a guardian now, but a partner in a shared, impossible task. When the forest finally opened and the cabin roof winked between trees, relief buckled my legs. I set Nathan down, lungs sawing. The wolf eased beside him, lowering her head so their cheeks brushed. He stirred, lips parting, and a sound escaped, soft, like he was thanking her. She huffed, eyes half closing, and rested her chin near his hand. I pulled the blanket tighter around my son, then faced her. Up close, the wound on her flank gaped raw. Infection oozed. She had bled for miles to fetch me, borrowed her remaining strength to guide us home. I reached out, palm open. Her ears twitched, but she didn't pull away. Our breath mingled, man and wolf, steam rising into the starlight. I whispered, "You did it. Let me do the rest." Maybe she understood. Maybe trust had already bridged the language gap, because she exhaled a shuddering sigh and, for the first time, closed her eyes. But she didn't fall. She waited. Waited while I heaved Nathan onto the sled I kept for hauling firewood, while I bound him tight with rope and blankets, while I hitched myself to the tow line. Only when I lurched forward toward the cabin did she gather her failing body and limp after us, a silent escort through the drifting snow, a father, a son, and the wolf who refused to leave, 3 shadows crossing a moon-washed clearing toward a lighted doorway. None of us were certain we'd reach in time. I hitched the sled rope across my shoulders and leaned forward until the runners broke free of the drift with a hiss. Nathan lay bundled in blankets, lantern set between his boots, its flame bobbing like a captive star. The she-wolf traveled on my left, limping but determined, her breath puffing white into the pine-dark air. Every few yards the sled jostled a root, and Nathan moaned. "Mama, wolf, mama," he rasped, voice frayed as birch bark. Each time the word left his lips, the wolf's ears flicked toward him, and she pushed ahead a pace, as if answering a pup's whimper. I swallowed hard. When he was small, he'd bring wounded sparrows home, swaddled in his shirt, begging me to fix them. He was always certain animals could love him back. Now one had done more than that, had carried him across the thin line between living and dying. The clearing opened, cabin windows glowing amber against the snow. I dug in my heels, dragging the sled over the threshold of light. The wolf halted at the first shadow of the trees. Moonlight washed her coat, silver over scars. She did not cross the open yard. She settled on her haunches among the trunks, gaze pinned to Nathan as though an invisible tether stretched between them. I heaved the sled onto the porch, muscles trembling. Before I lifted Nathan, I turned. She was still there, head high despite the wound, eyes catching the lantern flare with a depth that punched breath from my lungs. There was something human in that look, a question, maybe a plea. "Finish what I started." I raised a hand in promise. She blinked once, slow, deliberate, and remained where the forest swallowed her shadow. Inside, heat roared from the iron stove. I laid Nathan on the cot by the hearth, stripped the soaked clothes, wrapped him in quilts. He shivered so violently the frame rattled. I fed the fire birch logs until sparks whirled up the flue, then brewed weak tea laced with honey and broth. Between sips he drifted and surfaced, eyes cloudy, lips mumbling fragments. Snow, night songs. She kept me warm. I warmed towels on the stove, pressed them to his hands, his feet, the bruised swell of ribs. Hours bled together. Add wood, change towels, check pulse. Outside, wind keened along the eaves, but I caught softer sounds too, occasional pads crunching snow, a low woof that never came nearer than the tree line. She was keeping watch. Toward dawn, the fever cracked. Nathan's breathing steadied. His skin lost that blue glass tint. I dozed beside the cot, chin to chest, until a whisper pulled me upright. "Dad." His eyes, clear now, fixed on mine with childlike confusion and sudden joy. Tears blurred my sight before I could answer. He lifted a shaky hand, clutched my sleeve. "Where is she?" The words were sandpaper, but intent burned bright. "The wolf. She saved me." I drew a breath that stung like winter air. "She's outside. She led me to you." Nathan tried to rise. Agony folded him in half. I steadied him, made him sip broth. Between swallows his story spilled out, how ice gave beneath him, how he crawled blindly until the world dimmed, how warmth pressed against his back in the dark. He spoke of meat placed by his hands, of a rough tongue cleaning blood from his ankle, of golden eyes hovering whenever he woke. I called her Mama, he whispered, ashamed and awed. She never left. I brushed hair from his forehead, wild, matted, streaked with gray that hadn't been there 7 years ago. She didn't leave tonight either, I said. She waited to be sure you reached home. The truth of it cracked my voice. She could have crawled away to die, yet she chose to stand guard. Nathan's lashes trembled with fresh tears. Outside, the first pale wash of dawn gathered behind the pines. I crossed to the window. Fog rose from the snow, swirling around trunks like ghost smoke. For a moment I feared she'd vanished. Then a shape resolved, sleek, low, steady. She saw me watching and lifted her muzzle, not in challenge, but in silent acknowledgement. The gray fur along her wound glistened wet. Each breath made her sides hitch, yet her eyes shone with the calm of someone who has set a burden down. I pressed a hand to the glass. Go, I thought, though I couldn't say whether I meant into the forest or into whatever peace waits beyond pain. You've done enough. She blinked, slow, solemn, then turned and slipped between the trees, her tail the last thing to fade into the hush of snow. I sagged against the window frame, heart a tangle of gratitude and grief. I wanted to believe the worst was over, that the miracle had run its course. But even as that thought formed, the empty yard felt charged, unfinished, like nature held one more card just out of sight, waiting for the moment my guard dropped. I didn't know then how right that feeling was, or how deeply the wolf's final gift would change us both. Nathan slept the better part of the morning, slipping in and out of dreams while the stove ticked and the storm light dimmed behind the curtains. Around noon, his eyes found me again, steady this time, pupils no longer drifting. I handed him more broth, and after a few spoonfuls, he began to talk, voice rough but certain, like a man piecing together the edges of a miracle. He'd been crossing the upper creek when the snow crust buckled. One step and the world shattered, he said. Water knifed him, pulled the air from his lungs. He clawed at the ice rim until something gave way, maybe luck, maybe sheer terror, and he heaved himself onto the bank. The wind cut through soaked clothes, and the cold, he told me, was like glass grinding inside his bones. He staggered inland, blinded by sleet, then darkness swallowed him. When I woke, he murmured, fingers worrying the quilt seam, I thought I'd frozen to death and landed in some strange afterlife. He lay on pine duff under a split root, half buried in needles. Beside him, curled against his spine, was the she-wolf. Steam rose from her coat, fogging the small cave like breath from a furnace. At first he tried to crawl away, but her teeth closed gently on his sleeve. No puncture, just iron warning, and she tugged him back beneath the trunk's shelter. She was warmer than any blanket, he whispered. I pressed against her and felt my heart start up again. When trembling eased enough, he noticed a strip of rabbit laid across his palm, freshly killed, organs still hot. Hunger overcame horror. He ate, choked, ate again. That night she left the den 3 times. Each time he feared she was gone for good, yet she returned with meat, hairs, part of a grouse, once the hindquarter of a young deer, half her weight. She'd drag it to the entrance, rip free smaller chunks, push them toward him with her muzzle. Then she'd curl around him and sleep. Outside, other things moved. Foxes skulked, a lynx padded close, ravens settled on branches. She wouldn't let them near, he said, awe-stirring tears. One snarl and they scattered. When his fever spiked, he thrashed, delirious. The wolf licked sweat from his temples, nudged snow over his cheeks to cool the flush. He drifted between life and whatever waits beyond, always waking to the thrum of her heart against his ribs. Days blurred. He reckoned 5, maybe 6, judging by the faint crawl of light through the roots. Each time she brought food, she returned slower, flank gaping wider, but her eyes never dulled. He tried crawling out once to find water. She blocked the hole, shoved him back, trotted off, and came back with snow packed in a strip of bark for him to melt on his tongue. I stopped thinking of her as wild, he said. She was kind, like the woods had grown a soul and wrapped it in fur just long enough to save me. His voice cracked. He looked toward the window, where daylight slanted pale across frosted glass. I thought when she led you to me, that was her way of saying goodbye. Debt paid, story over. He sank back, exhaustion tugging at him, and gave me a half smile that was more sorrow than relief. I wanted to thank her. I never got the chance. I gripped his hand, heartbeat hammering with gratitude and dread in equal measure. Outside, the tree line stood motionless, secrets folded beneath snow. I told Nathan she had waited until we reached the porch, that she'd watched through the night. He closed his eyes, let that picture settle like embers in a hearth. For a long time neither of us spoke, the room solidifying around soft breaths and crackling wood. I thought, naively, that this was the end of it. The wolf had delivered her miracle. Now the story would taper into quiet recovery, father and son mending what 7 winters had torn. But nature has a habit of opening new doors the moment you think every threshold has been crossed. What I didn't know, as dusk crept over the snowfields and the wolves' distant chorus rose like morning bells, was that the she-wolf had not left us to finish the tale alone. I believed we had spoken our last farewell. I was wrong, and the forest was already weaving the next impossible chapter. At dawn, a hush lay over the valley, the kind that settles only after hard weather has spent itself. I opened the door, breath fogging the threshold, and there in the faint rose light saw a single trail of fresh prints circling the gate. Neat ovals, one hind paw dragging, drops of dried rust in each impression. My chest tightened. She had come back, sometime in the night, silent as memory, and waited. I followed the marks to the yard's edge. There she stood between 2 spruces, snow mantle on her shoulders, head high despite the ragged wound along her ribs. She didn't approach. She only watched the cabin, ears tipped forward as though listening for a heartbeat inside. I called to Nathan, and he limped onto the porch wrapped in a blanket. The moment she saw him, she loosed a sound so soft the trees seemed to lean closer to hear, a low, tremulous note that hovered between greeting and farewell. Nathan gripped the post, tears streaking wind-burned cheeks. He whispered, "She's saying goodbye." He took one step into the snow. The wolf answered with a second, smaller howl, almost a sigh, then lowered her head the way a mother nuzzles a pup she's about to send into the wide world. In her eyes shone a peace I hadn't seen before, quiet, whole, as if some private duty were finally complete. For a heartbeat, neither of them moved. A shaft of pale sun slid through the branches, gilding her fur. Every breath she drew shimmered gold. Then she turned, deliberately, without haste, and limped toward the shadows beneath the pines. Branches bowed apart, welcoming her home. Just before the darkness swallowed her, she glanced back over her shoulder, gaze settling on Nathan one last time. She looked at him as if she had released him, and then she was gone forever. Nathan sank to his knees, sobs shaking the cold from his lungs. I knelt beside him, holding his shoulders, while the forest stitched itself closed around the place she'd vanished. No crack of twig, no whisper of paw prints, only stillness, as though the world acknowledged the sacredness of her exit. If your heart is pounding right now, you understand. Subscribe to the channel. Here we share the raw, impossible truth of what animals can do. We stayed there until our fingers numbed, hoping for one more glimpse, one more miracle. None came, yet the clearing felt fuller than before. charged with the imprint of a bond no winter could erase. Nathan wiped his eyes, whispered, "Thank you," into the trees, and the pines replied with the faint, consoling hush of snow slipping from high boughs. Inside, the stove crackled, but the room felt larger, emptied of whatever unseen hand had been guiding us. Nathan sat by the window all morning, gaze fixed on the tree line. Each time a crow fluttered past, hope sparked in his eyes, then dimmed. By noon, the prints at the gate had drifted over, soft ridges where the wind laid fresh powder, and the yard looked untouched, except we knew better. We carried her story now, warm as the fire, fierce as her heartbeat. I brewed tea, handed him a mug. He stared into the steam. "She waited to be sure," he said. "She wanted to see me stand on my own legs first." He sipped, swallowed hard. "She trusted me to live." Outside, clouds gathered, pregnant with more snow. Somewhere beyond those trees, a gray shape moved slower every hour, bleeding out the final debt she believed she owed a stranger cub. I wanted to find her, to repay in stitches and salve what bullets and frost had taken, but something in the calm of her last look, steady, resolute, told me my hands would not be welcome now. Her story had chosen its end, and dragging her back would only unravel the grace she'd carved into this wilderness. When dusk settled, Nathan dozed by the hearth. I opened the door once more, scanning the dark. Wind pressed cold against my face, but beneath it I caught a lingering warmth, a fragrance of pine and living fir, as though her spirit hung in the air, making certain we remembered. We would. For the rest of my days, I would see those eyes each time dawn touched the snow, would hear that gentle farewell in the hush between owl calls, and whenever doubt rose, about kindness, about the hidden wisdom running under the skin of the wild, I would recall how a wounded wolf carried my son's life in her teeth and laid it gently at my feet. Spring eased across the valley the way a lamp warms a dark room, slow, certain, unstoppable. Ice broke from the creek in clinking shards, the first bluebells punched through rot-soft snow, and Nathan's color returned day by day. By April, he could walk the porch without the cane, face lifted to the sun like a man relearning what light feels like on bare skin. Watching him, I felt the tight band around my heart loosen, yet one thread still pulled, straight back into the forest where her den lay. I waited until Nathan slept, then packed water, a hatchet, a coil of rope, habits of a lifetime, and set out alone. The pines smelled of rain instead of frost, chickadees scolded overhead, every step squelched in mud. But beneath that new green rush hung another scent, faint as driftwood smoke, the memory of wolf, iron, and blood. It guided me down the old ravine like an invisible hand. The fallen spruce loomed where we'd crawled out months earlier, its roots clawing the hillside like frozen thunder. Snow had melted from the entrance, leaving an oval mouth gaping black against fresh moss. I knelt, lantern unlit in my fist, and listened. No breath, no stir, only drip-drip of meltwater. I crawled inside. Sunlight knifed through cracks overhead, striping the chamber in gold bars. They fell across what remained. A scatter of gray bones gnawed smooth, clumps of silver fur snagged on roots, dark crusts where blood had soaked and dried. The smell hit me, old copper, damp hide, and my knees buckled. I crouched, fingertips hovering over one slender rib. It snapped at a touch, as brittle as year-old leaves. She was here. This was the last of her, the shell she shed to save the stranger cub she'd chosen. No grave, no stone, just bones in the dirt where she had spent her final warmth keeping my son alive. Grief slammed through me so violently I thought it would tear skin. I pressed a hand to the earth. "You saved my boy while you were dying," I whispered, voice shaking. "You gave everything." The words cracked, and tears spilled hot onto the mud. I let them fall. They felt right, payment in salt for a debt in blood. She saved my son, dying, gave everything. Saying it out loud made the cave pulse with truth. I picked up a tuft of her fur, still soft, still carrying the wild scent of snow and pine. I folded it into my palm like a relic and swore I'd keep it safe. Then I bowed my head, not to pray. I had no prayer big enough, but to honor the silence she'd become. If your heart is pounding right now, you understand, subscribe to the channel. Here we share the raw truth of what animals can do and how their courage can change a life. I backed out into sunlight, wiping tears. Wind shifted through the spruces, carrying a single gray feather to my boots. I tucked it beside the fur, two small proofs that miracles leave traces even when their makers vanish. I thought that was the last I'd ever see of her, that the forest had closed the book for good. But nature never disappears without a trace. Autumn sets the mountains ablaze, maples burn like embers, aspens flick gold through the valley, but the first breath of evening already tastes of coming frost. A year has slipped by since the night the forest loaned me my son back, and still I walk the same trail at dusk, a silent roll call for ghosts. Nathan is strong now. He hunts photographs instead of deer, hikes the ridges with a quiet reverence that was never in him before. He wanted to join me tonight, but some instincts feel too private to share. So I stand alone at the edge of the clearing where the pines thin into open field, hands buried in flannel pockets, listening to the hush that gathers when light folds its wings. Wind rattles dried fern stalks. A raven clacks overhead. I turn to head home and freeze. There, half shadowed by birch trunks, stands a young wolf. His coat is the brushed steel gray of river-washed stone. His legs look almost too long for his body, the way yearlings do when they're suddenly all muscle and promise. But it's his ear that nails my breath to my ribs, the left tip torn into a ragged notch, identical to the scar the she-wolf carried the night she limped into my life. My pulse slams. He should bolt at the smell of me. Every instinct says run. Instead, he levels those amber eyes on mine, bright, unblinking, ancient, and simply watches. 30 paces of cool air tremble between us. Somewhere a leaf lets go of its branch and twirls through silence, a tiny, spiraling clock, hand marking the seconds he grants me. The pup's chest rises and falls, steady. A plume of vapor escapes his nostrils and dissolves. I swear I feel the shape of his gaze, like fingers brushing the back of my thoughts, searching for something gentle. The forest folds itself around us, waiting. I don't move. I barely breathe. My eyes sting, visions swimmy with the weight of what he is evidence of. She left more than bones in that den. She left blood and memory and courage, walking the world on new paws. He cocks his head, ears twitching, reading the clutter of my heart. Then, no hurry, no fear, he turns. For 3 steps he treads the path between spruce roots, glances back once more, and slips into shadow so smoothly the trees seem to exhale him. I sag against a birch, fingers digging into bark. Tears surge hot, blur the clearing into watercolor reds and golds. My voice comes out rough, a prayer dragged over gravel. If you're hers, then she's still here, living in the wind, in the tracks, in you. A hush answers, deep and resonant, like the forest consenting to the truth. I wipe my face, laughter snagging on sobs. All this time I thought the chapter ended in that root-bound cave, but nature rarely writes a period where humans expect one. She prefers ellipses, invites us to read the white space. The sky bruises purple. I start back toward the cabin, boots whispering through fallen needles, heart strangely buoyant, light the way a candle is light after the first hard winter night. I carry with me the steady confidence shining in that young wolf's eyes, an inheritance of trust passed from mother to son to man. I reach the porch, and warm light spills through the window where Nathan sorts prints from his last hike. He looks up, concern flaring until he sees the tears on my cheeks are not pain. I raise a trembling hand, fingertip tracing the shape of a torn ear in the air. Understanding dawns in his face. His own eyes fill, and for a moment, we stand on either side of the glass, reflections of gratitude mirroring each other. Inside, I tuck the little tuft of her fur, kept safe all year, into a wooden box lined with cedar. Now the relic has meaning beyond grief. It belongs to a living lineage. Outside, the wind catches, rustling oak leaves like distant applause, as though the forest itself is satisfied we finally understand. This couldn't be real, but I saw it with my own eyes. And now I know. Animals remember kindness, even when they're gone. If you believe in a special connection with animals, right? We are not alone in this world.